Good evening and welcome. I'm Laura Gelfand. I'm Professor of Art History and Head of the Department of Art and Design, and I have the honor of introducing tonight's speaker. But first, I need to thank some of the many people who've made her visit and the entire Visiting Artists series, of which this lecture is part, possible. The Communitas series features artists, designers, and scholars whose lives and work promote the values of equality, diversity, and togetherness. The series has been funded by the Maria Eccles Caine Foundation, Russell Family, the Tanner Foundation, the Department of Art and Design, and differential tuition contributed by every student enrolled in classes in the Caine College of the Arts. This year-long series is the department's signature event for USU's Year of the Arts celebration. I also want to thank Kathy Pusey, Associate Professor of Printmaking, who first suggested bringing Tanja to USU and who, together with the amazing Sage Parrott and Adam Liestma, have organized her visit, which has included almost a full week of workshops. Now, on to the speaker. Tanja Softic is currently Professor of Printmaking at the University of Richmond in Virginia. She studied at the Academy of Fine Arts at the University of Sarajevo and earned an MFA in printmaking at Old Dominion University in Norfolk. Tanja's work has been shown in numerous exhibitions in the U.S. and abroad and is in the permanent collections of the New York Public Library, the Library of Congress, and many other important institutions. She's received grants from the Pollock-Krasner Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the Soros Foundation. So, I'm pleased to have the opportunity to welcome her to USU, and I ask you now to help me welcome her to the stage.
Thank you very much, and thanks for everybody for having me here and coming to this talk. There's just a little bit of pressure with this voice of God thing, and who knew voice of God had a Bosnian accent? You know, things can happen. So give me just one moment to turn on my meditation timer, which I haven't used for actual meditation for a long time. But because I'm a somewhat of a chatty type, you know, you're going to hear little pings every 15 minutes. That's there to keep me on track. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Department of Art, my dear friend, Kathy Pusey, who I think we have met, 12 years ago or something like that, you know, and it's a good thing that we are only getting younger and more energetic and smarter at the same time. And thank you for this wonderful introduction, and I've really had a wonderful time here. The students have made some beautiful mezzotins today. We've done a mezzotint, a process called Chincolé. I also want to thank Adam for making that great poster and Sage for helping organize all of this. So anyway, you live in a really, really beautiful place, and Bosnia is super mountainous, but a little bit smaller. It's kind of like, Utah is more like a Bosnia on steroids. It's big. But to be in the mountains, it's like a balm for my soul. I live on the East Coast, and it's sticky and spongy, and it's still climbing up almost to the 90s, so I've had it with the summer. So I'm going to talk a little bit more. I've spoken to printmakers a great deal about my technique, about how technically I do work. I have touched upon the concepts in my works. I'm hoping to be maybe not clearer, but to go into a little more depth in this particular talk and kind of talk about how I build my work, conceptually and physically also, because two things are, when you're a visual artist, for most visual artists, especially for printmakers, ideas in the work are really indistinguishable from the process in which you make it, and the process of printmaking is very important to me, even though a number of pieces that you are going to be looking at, such as this one, are not prints, but they they're made with they're made with the hands of and mind, I should say, of a printmaker, and they involve things that are very characteristic of, printmaking, the layering of the images, the, this ability to put kind of a disparate concepts, images, and together. What you're looking at, I should say, I'm going to talk about it more later on, but this is a relatively large piece. It's about but it's exactly, whoa, voice of God just came from here somehow. It is 5 feet by 10 feet, so it's quite large, and it is done on a Japanese paper that's been mounted onto the gessoed board. And I'll talk a little bit about why I do it that way later. So, what are the building blocks of my work? What are the things that get me excited? What is it that I do? Why do I find these things important? As you have heard, I'm an immigrant to this country. I'm a naturalized American, and I came in 1989 thinking I'm going to get my MFA degree and then I'm going to go back and, do something in Sarajevo. And actually on the day when I was defending my MFA thesis, they have started the bombardment of Sarajevo. And there was simply no place for me to go back. And so, as I was waiting for things to end and for this craziness to stop and so on, I started working here. I started teaching at Rollins College in Florida at that time, and here I am, American now. And because memory is a concept so important to all of us, even if we don't think so. And hereby I'm thinking about all kinds of memory. Think about the word that think about things that word memory can be applied to. Materials have memory, the bodies have memory in terms of scars and injuries that we have. The societies have memory, hopefully. Ours is faltering a little bit at the moment. Remembering things, kind of regathering these parts of your life, especially when there is not much material stuff, left, it becomes, particularly poignant, at that time. There's no ancestral home anymore. I have very few pictures from my early life. When I started my first job at Rollins, I told them, well, you'll just have to trust me that I've graduated, that I have my BFA from Academy of Fine Arts in Sarajevo, because there was no way of contacting anybody to give me my transcripts or anything like that. So you do maybe a little bit more than the rest of us do. You do a lot of patching. You're trying to connect things that to other people, don't seem like a connection. But, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, some of the great influences on my work. This is a 19th century, classicist painting of the Roman senator orating in the Roman Senate. And I think it's Cato. I'm not sure. I think it represents Cato. But the last great republican of the Roman Republic. And at that time, they didn't have paper. It would be way too expensive to use papyrus to write down the entire talk. It would take way too many clay tablets, because these people didn't get up and talk for 10 minutes and go away. These people would sometimes orate for 5-6 hours. And with the death of Fidel Castro, nobody talks for that long anymore. And so how did they do that? They were not just chatting about their lives. These were very complex, involved, philosophical, legal talks, it was very important to remember everything. How did they remember? How did they memorize the 6 hours worth of speech? So I came across this book by the historian Francis Yates. It's called The Art of Memory. And in it, I've discovered this, this concept of mnemonic or memory training in the ancient Rome that Cicero described in Ad Herennium and, kind of a handbook for the orators. So what Cicero says, this is how it worked for Romans. What Cicero he concedes that you need to have kind of like a good kind of a mnemonic trap mind, that you can kind of hold the concepts in your head. But that is actually something that you can actually be trained to memorize things. And keep in mind, I'm talking about this in our day and age. What do we really need to memorize anymore? It's all on the smartphone. You can look it up in 5 seconds. Kids are not taught to memorize poems by heart, although that is coming back into the schools. And you just cannot but wonder, what did we lose? I mean, we have gained a great deal with this access to the information and so on, but what did we lose? What did we lose? What kind of a development chance for our brain we have used? So here's, in very broad strokes, what training of what Roman orators were trained to do. They were encouraged to think about their whole speech as a large building, a large edifice. So think about Roman architecture, especially their residential architecture. There's a courtyard, the atrium in the middle, and then the rooms are arranged around the perimeter. And your job as an orator was to kind of stack your mind with images from each room in that big edifice, right? And that as you're talking, that you're envisioning walking through those rooms, entering into the rooms in which you have visualized, worked very hard on visualizing these basically still lives, tableau vivants, however you want to call it, these sort of setups of things that are not going to be representations of the thing you're talking about, because again, these were, they were talking sometimes about some very abstract, non-imageable, things, and that as you're entering each room, those things that you have imagined are going to trigger the memories of the speech. I read that and I thought that was the best piece of information I've ever got in my entire life. Connecting the memory, connecting how our brain works to hold things, from our past, things that we need to memorize for whatever reason, is connected with the visual, with the building, itself. So, and if you really think about it, isn't this a little bit like the way the electricity travels, through the chip, getting into places, retrieving information, and so on? Probably, if anybody who's of IT, they're probably horrified by what I'm saying now. But anyway, I thought that was, that was really, that was very important to me. So this art of memory was cultivated in the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance. And one of the wonderful examples of it are, for example, these works by Giotto. This is, those of you who've taken the, I think, second part of survey, I don't know, might recognize these as a parts of the Scrovegni Chapel in Padua, the Giotto's, one of the Giotto's more important work, and they were done in grisaille. And what grisaille is basically monochromatic painting. And there's just a little bit of color underneath, but they're kind of made to resemble statues. So as there were scenes from the life of Christ in between the columns, I think that, or these niches, there were also figures of virtues and vices. So here's a charity on my side, and there is, Cicero talks about how images of those things that you put in these still lifes of memory, if you will, need to be either strikingly beautiful or strikingly ugly, so that they will stay in your mind. So in Giotto's work, here is how it works. Here's Charity. Look how beautiful she is. Look how beautifully her robe is being draped. Look at that great fruit bowl and flower bowl that she's offering. And she's standing on the bags of gold, and she's extending the hand, and God himself is giving her even more. And then look at the envy on the other side. She's burning in the flames of her own envy. They're not next to each other, by the way. I've just put them that way into, this image. Look at the envy. There's a snake coming out of her mouth, and snake is biting her right into the forehead. She's clutching the bag of money, and she's reaching with this ugly, grabby, gesture. So this is the concept that in the Middle Ages was called the Biblia Pauperum, a Bible for the poor, meaning for people who didn't know how to read and write. You better know that charity is good, and you better know that envy is a mortal sin. Even though in Renaissance they haven't spoken so much, and they haven't trained the orators in such a way. After all, they've had much easier ways to record things and, read from it, and the literacy was much greater than, say, in Middle Ages. This is how things persisted, this concept persisted in the art. The other concept that I'm really interested in, the concept of hybridity, and that's again something like a memory, something that you can apply. We can talk about hybrid species of, say, corn. We can also talk about cultural hybrids. I find myself to be one. I was talking to people the other day, and one funny thing that happens to me, I have passed that half and half point. At this point, I have lived in the U.S. longer than I have, lived back home. And one strange thing that happens to me when I go back is that I can sit and eavesdrop in a cafe and eavesdrop on people's conversation as much as I want. Nobody registers me as a Bosnian anymore. And I'm trying to understand why that is, And here, when I'm here, people say, oh, where are you from? The accent, and so on. So, there's this, to a degree, I'm living in a certain state of neither here nor there. I'm sort of a slash person, Bosnian/American. So, and I'm not, I'm not presenting that as some sort of a horrible, great tragedy or anything like that. It is just simply the state that very, very many people in the world live now, and there will only be more people who will be displaced due to the climate events, due to the wars, due to the famines, due to the things that you can see happening around us, more and more. So this particular piece that I'm showing is it is dedicated to Edward Said, the scholar whose work is very important to me, that not just validated but also challenged some of the ways that I've been working with the ideas of hybridity, immigration, memory, and all of that. He's the author of a very seminal postmodern essay on exile. I think it was, he wrote it, I believe, in 76 or something like that, sometime in the mid-70s, and in which he talks about the mindset of an immigrant, the worldview of an immigrant as being contrapuntal, using these musical terms. He's talking about the state of being neither here nor there. And at that time, it's interesting, I was just rereading it for some reason the other day, and he talks about there is a small minority of people for whom the reality is not solid in a way. It might be somewhat solid to somebody who's always lived, say, in the same place, and who knows where the home is and where home isn't, and so on. And again, but I was also realizing living in this country that is so diverse and so filled with very different experiences, very different beliefs, very different kinds of people that are, coming that are coming here and that have maybe been here for many generations, or maybe Native Americans and have been here for many, 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 many generations, and again, I'm not talking about it some sort of a horrible tragedy. I'm talking about this kind of a state of mind. Another thing that has very indelibly affected me is I was here. I was not in Sarajevo during the 3.5-year siege. It was the longest siege in the modern history of the city. Sarajevo is like many towns in the Rockies, it's basically in the bowl between the very high mountains. And you guys are way too young to remember Bosnian War. Some of you haven't been born yet, but the city was shelled for 3.5 years, encircled by the separatist, nationalist, Serb forces. I'm not going to go into explaining, what the conflict was, but and the city was shelled with anti-aircraft and anti-tank weapons, so that when these missiles were lobed onto the city, they wouldn't like crush one wall; they would go through several walls and then explode. So one of and civilian targets were deliberately targeted. So this is the image of on August 21st, 1993. Somebody has come up with a fantastic idea to start shelling the library. This is Bosnian equivalent of Library of Congress. Over 300 and some books were lost, some of them very valuable manuscripts, and part of the tragedy is that people who were bombing it were destroying their own history as well. They thought that they were doing this to Muslims in Sarajevo and so on. But Bosnia is a multicultural country. They're Muslims, they're Catholics, they're Orthodox Christians, they're Jews. There's a number and number of other smaller groups. Bosnia really does not and cannot belong to like United States. It's a very diverse place. So a number of people, my friends, who were in the city during the siege, told me that the library was, imagine when you put on fire, that many books. And so one friend, somebody told me, and actually a number of people told me, that it was brightly burning for 3 days straight. And then for about a week afterwards, people would there were charred pieces of books were falling onto the city. And if you caught them in your hand, you could still read the letters because the sheen of the ink versus the dustiness of the burned paper, was still showing. But the moment you touched them or tried to flatten them or preserve them, they would fall apart because they were essentially ashes. A curator that I interviewed in Sarajevo told me that he was he was a rare book curator, and he was among the last people, what was happening when the library started burning. Citizens, employees of the library, students, were running in, trying to grab handfuls of whatever they could grab and run out. And he was among the last ones after everybody finally said, the beams are falling, get out, everybody get out, everybody get out. And he said he turned around and he thought that he was hallucinating because he was seeing silver waterfalls going down the columns, around the atrium in the library. And he thought it's heat, it's, sorrow, it's whatever. I was hallucinating. And actually somebody explained to him later on, this was a building, it's sort of done in Orientalist style by the Austro-Hungarians when Bosnia was a colony of the Austro-Hungarian Empire after it was colony of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. He said, no, you are not hallucinating. The Austrians at that time were using lead to sort of water seal in between the floors, and what he was seeing is actually that lead melted, from the upper floors running down the columns. This is the work by, this is what happens to me lately, it's just, the thought just gets sucked out of my head. This is the work of Sigmar Polke, German, at the time, East German painter, and I'm showing his work here because he was very, very influential in my development, when I was a graduate student here. I was seeing his work in books at that time. We didn't have an internet, and I kind of never quite got it. It just seemed like messy and whatever, to me. Why is this so special, type of thing. And then I went, I was in San Francisco as a graduate student and saw his exhibition, and there really is a value of seeing works in person. There's no way you can experience it online or in a book the way you do if you're standing in front of it, if you're kind of establishing this relationship, of your own physicality to the physicality of the work. So that kind of happened to me. What he's painting on are these vinyl tablecloths. I don't know how much you had them around, but it was kind of like a staple of every Eastern European household. Those horrible, kitschy, patterned vinyl tablecloths that you could wipe with a sponge and not worry about, washing them and so on. And this is the painting called the Paganini. And what is happening here, and he uses a lot of print material as collage, in his work. So you can see kind of on the right, you can see the image, the old print of somebody's illustration of Paganini on his deathbed. Now, Paganini was, he was a 18th century composer and violinist, and he was such an accomplished violinist, and he was kind of a lush, he ended up dying of syphilis. But so for that reason, and also a number of other reasons, he made enemies with some very important people in the Catholic Church. He was prosecuted and he was hounded for most of his life by the Inquisition, Jesuit Inquisition, and even his beautiful playing, even his virtuosic playing was listed as a proof that he's really devil, So you can see, so there's Paganini dying, devil is playing the violin on his bed, and there's this kind of a spiral of death is going into this other panel, and everything is painted in these horrible, vinyl tablecloths that we all learned to hate as children, in Eastern Europe. And if you think about it, he's a East German artist working in East German state, which was super, super repressive, probably one of the most repressive communist, regimes, in the world. And, slowly you start connecting yourself, the elements in it and coming to it with some sort of understanding. And what I really admired about his work is that he respected his viewers, that he respected the people who were coming, to his work, and he let us make those connections ourselves, so to speak. Printmaking. So this is I brought one of these prints. Those of you who were with me in a workshop, recognize this one. So I'm going to kind of go through the process of how color print is printed. And All of my degrees are really in painting. You know, I have one college class of formal education in printmaking, yet most people who know my work now know me as a printmaker. And this is one of the things I really love about printmaking. I'm not a Star Trek fan, but, you know, I use this image to sort of explain the concept. Okay, so you know that teleporter, is that how it's called, that machine that beams them somewhere else, and somebody does this thing, and then they disappear, and then they're down on some... Can somebody tell me, have you ever seen an episode of Star Trek where they kind of go away and come back no problem? Right? There's something always goes terribly wrong, you know, in the middle. They get reconstituted into cosmic plasma, and they never constitute them back into the people. So, and, you know, they're always kind of going, and they're standing there like people in the elevator, you know, with those blank faces, like, and, you know, and I want to scream, something terrible is about to happen, get out of there. So printmaking is a little bit like that. I am interested in what happens when everything kind of, you know, I was telling printmakers, I'm one of those people, when I get a new appliance, I never read the instructions. I mean, who has time for that, right? But I love to see those exploded view images. So let me show you a little bit, you know, what I mean by that about printmaking. I have somewhat incomplete sequence of printing of this print, and a lot of people ask me in the intro printmaking class how the color, you know, may be done. And this is that same print, you know, with the bee on it that I have shown you before. So in printmaking, just like when newspapers or anything else is printed, there is something that we call color separation. And then there is something that we call registration. So basically, each color in intaglio print, which this thing is, has to come from a separate plate. So this is the very first plate. You can see that there is nothing happening, you know, in the square where the bee is going to come later. And this is my assistant that time. So here's the second plate being printed, you know, over it. Here we are printing the third plate. And then during that printing, we have also, through the process called chincolle, encased this image, the photopolymer etching of the bee itself. So there is something good that happens for me, for my brain, when I work in this process, when I put it in a teleporter and send it out in the space, and then it kind of all comes together. I suppose that I'm not, my musical education is pretty limited, but I would imagine that this is a little bit like orchestrating after you have developed a piece for the orchestra. Lots of things need to come together. And that works for me. I have never been terribly interested in sort of singular images of one thing. I like the idea of aggregate images. You know, I probably see my own life as this sort of aggregate thing of unlikely things that have come together. And I'm also, you know, realizing when I was a kid, I was helping my mother, who was a theater and dance historian, work in the archives. She had a terrible dust allergy, so I would help her do some stuff so she wouldn't have to stay there for so long. So we would be kind of sitting there with our dust masks, and, you know, she would be going to things. And I was a kid, so I would get bored, and I would go and play with the stage set maquettes, you know, the models for the stage. And what I loved about it, you know, you lift one curtain and you're outside, you put it down, you're sitting inside. And this idea of having that power to, you know, through one layer kind of change the whole context, to change the whole feeling of things was really, really important to me. This is also one of the things, one of the prints that I have brought here, and the printmakers, you guys have seen it in a better way, you know, seeing the original. It's a lithograph, and it's called Fall and Flow, and And I guess I guess I could stop here and talk a little bit about how I, build things for these spilling bowls. You're going to see them appear, in my work, and the life itself is a process of sort of gathering things and then spending them or spilling them, and it's also, it has a lot of connotations for me, pouring the holy oils, spilling the secrets, literally. And basically the piece is about water, if you will. There are kidneys over there, often use our internal organs, and everybody, a few collectors have told me, that's a beautiful thing, why did you have to put kidneys into it? And, it never occurred to me that an image of a kidney should be, that somebody could conceive it as gross. My father was a cancer researcher. One of my first idea of, beautiful, fun things was him picking me up and showing me things in the microscope. I had no idea I was looking at breast cancer cells, but, in that, purple dye that we're using at that time, I might as well have been looking at the most beautiful landscapes out there. This is also, one of those pieces. So I was trying to tell people earlier when I talk about them, as a visual artist, you can work kind of like a prose writer or essayist or something like that. And I feel that I sort of work more like a poet. And going back to some of the Sigmar Polka's idea, I really want readers of visual images, the viewers to, I'm hoping to hear from them also what have they brought to piece, what did their cultural background, what did their personal history, what did things they know and don't know, and love and don't love, what do those things, bring to the image. So this was also happening when I was working on that print. I was at Tamarind Institute, which is at University of New Mexico, and on a weekend I decided to rent a car and make a trip to Very Grand Array, where the satellite dishes are, and it's a magnificent place. Of course, I walked right in where I wasn't supposed to work, and then there were all these guards like, get out of there. So, but anyways, as I had my 10 seconds, in the middle of the field, all of a sudden I heard this really subtle beep, 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 beep sound, and all of them were turning, towards something, I don't know, some planet that had to be observed or something like that. And then I come back from Tamarind, and my garden is full of weeds. And there's this really gorgeous weed. Virginia is like weed country. So there's this really gorgeous weed, and so I'm kind of relaxing after my trip, and it's doing the very same thing, turning toward the sun. So somehow these things kind of came together for me. All right. Now, this is something that this is a slide that I always show to students. I show it to my students, and normally artists don't show the images of their terrible failures, but I think it's very important that we address that. See that big piece, on the side, actually what's on the table is you can see that it attaches to it. All right, so I started working on this cycle, Migrant Universe, and it was summer, and I was eager, and I wanted to make them big, and I wanted to make them, and I was going to show the world what I can do, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so this piece is 15, 20 feet. So I started working on this piece 5 feet by 20 feet. And I worked on it pretty much all summer long. That's the piece in the background, that's 5 by 10, is the only other piece that I have done that summer. And I've been working on it, and things were not working, and I've been reworking, and I've been working on it, and I've been working on it. And summer ended, and I put it back into my studio at University of Richmond, and I kept working on it, and I kept working on it, and it just didn't want to talk back to me. And one day I walked in, and I realized I'm beating on a dead horse. This piece is dead. It's never going to happen. And I work that way a lot. I destroy a lot of stuff. And you would think that I would like start immediately beating my head against the wall because, you know, summer is the most valuable time for academic artists, right? It's our time to really get in the studio and work in a very focused way. But, you know, all I felt was an immense sense of relief that I have known that this space is dead. So I'm hoping, let this be sort of my humble, you know, gift to you. Failure is necessary. You know, as a culture, we don't tolerate it very well. When we fail at things, we fake that we haven't failed. We have a hard time accepting that, you know, it's over, it ain't going any further, right? We have a very hard time accepting the mistakes, which is not a good. It's not a good mindset to be in. You know, Samuel Beckett, the playwright, has said what I think is one of the best advice for an artist or anybody else trying to do anything else of significance in life. When you fail, get up, fail again, fail better. Meaning learn from your failure. So what I do, you know, when a piece dies, you know, I kind of cut out, I say I harvested for organs. So I pick up the pieces that may come handy in some other, you know, in some other things, and I moved on, and they were resurfaced, and I started working on another thing. You can see the piece. This was my studio at University of Richmond. Basically, it's a basement, but you can see I'm trying hard. I keep beating on that horse. But I'm also showing you, this is for the benefit of the artists. I work on, this is the work on the cycle migrant universe that I have worked on for about 5-6 years. It's the largest body of work that I have created. And it was, in a sense, kind of a summation of the work that I have been doing, you know, for years, about the memory, about consciousness of an immigrant, about looking at things in a way where you are kind of seeking clues in unlikely places, if you will. So just for the benefit of art students, I will just quickly go through this process because people ask me, how do I do this? So you can see I have the Japanese paper here. I'm pointing at things at my screen like that's going to help you. So you can see some Japanese paper that is ready to be mounted on. So basically I take the panels, I gesso them as if I'm going to be painting on them to give them some, you know, extra smoothness, and then I just, you know, mount it using the acrylic. And because Japanese paper is incredibly strong, there is a reason why Japanese paper is used for bookbinding and for, like, you know, aircraft modeling and, you know, things like that. It seems delicate, but it has a lot longer fiber than the Western paper, so it's quite strong. The one thing it's not made for drawing on it in a Western sense of the word. It's made for a brush. It's made for calligraphic type of a work. So what I have to do is I have to size it. I have to harden it. Basically, I have to impregnate it, kind of the way you have to. In the old times, when we did that, when we were camping, you had to like impregnate the cloth of the tent for camping with wax, you know, so that you're not going to get wet while you're sleeping. So you have to make it a little bit less absorbent, and you have to make it a little bit less ready to sort of peel as you are working on it. And I do that with this very, very thin mix of, oh God, this was such a hot day. It must have been like 103 or something. And I'm outside in the sculpture yard at University of Richmond. And so what I'm doing, again, I'm pointing to this. What I'm doing here, I'm basically kind of dribbling this acrylic, very thinned out acrylic medium, kind of like something you would make for paper mache if you're making a piñata or something like that. And And that process lasts probably for a couple of days. I dribble and drip a layer, and then I let it dry. You can see I dribble and drip, and I lift it so that things will run. So that runniness that you see in my work, that runniness, the background, dribbliness of my background, that's what you're looking at. I accomplish that. That kind of a ground that I like, something that is in state of flow, something that is in state of flux, if you will. But it also has sort of this practical version, so I can work on it. I work with plants a lot. This happens to be Virginia creeper, and I'm probably the only person in the state of Virginia that considers it a beautiful decorative plant and not a horrible weed that you have to take out. You go to Florence, what's hanging underneath the Ponte Vecchio? It's Virginia creeper. It's just not invasive in Europe, but it's very invasive in American South. And I'm partial to these sort of immigrant plants, so to speak. It was brought, accidentally, from Europe. And I think that the stories of plants, the hybrid plants, the plants that have traveled and so on, there's a lot to be said about, wanted and unwanted. This is considered weed, this is considered great. For example, why is English ivy not considered a weed? It's horribly invasive, So anyway, I like Virginia creeper better, clearly. So, and this, this is when I showed you some of the other things. One of the things that I do, I use photography in my work a lot. It's not necessarily obvious, in all the pieces. But this is basically, I photograph plants kind of in a bad way, like at the beginning or at the end of the day when there's no direct sunlight on them. And I do what they tell you, don't do that. When you're photographing people, don't photograph counter light. Don't have the light be behind your object because your black object is going to appear as something close to just the outline. And so that's what I do. This is actually really composite. This is not the view I've seen. This is sort of several plants that I've put in a Photoshop and did the layer thing and so on. And came, with this image that I then project, onto the paper. You can see at the time I was still using the old artograph. I was the last person in the world that used an overhead projector for this. Now I'm using digital projectors. They work much better. You don't have to wait for dark, to do it. And I use this stencil process where I put this rubber stencil in the negative areas, the lighter areas here, and so that when I brush like very thin layers of acrylic over it, it's going to appear flat almost as it has been screen printed. I don't want it to have brush personality. The beautiful thing about mounting Japanese paper onto the board is that if it has any thickness, it has been done in plies because Japanese paper is normally thin. So what I do here is, what I'm doing here is I'm about to put one of those inserts. My mother always says, "Why do you always turn everything into an ID card?" And and then, that Gampi paper that we've been using today to do the Shinkolei, that's the same paper that I use to make these patches. So what I do is I kind of score into paper, peel off that one layer, and then I replace it with the other layer, and you'd never know that there was difference. That's one of the things this paper is really good. So I'm going to walk you through the pieces in the migrant universe a little bit. Just go through, all of them. This one, the angel, as I was finishing it up, my father died. And this is the piece that kind of came in, after his death. The chrysanthemum is the flower, the graveyard flower of mourning in many cultures, including mine. And so there was something about the grief that I was feeling that I felt is like the grief blooms, it sort of opens up, and at times it engulfs you, and sometimes it gets, smaller. And, the things that I've been regretting were the fact that we didn't get to spend a whole lot of time. I lived here, he lived over there in his old age. This is actually, I'm totally going in a wrong direction, but this is actually the first piece. It's called A Night in the Garden, and really I'm referring to the night in the Garden of Gethsemane, and that's still before the storm, that happens. This piece is the map of what happened. Obviously, this is not like a map of anything, but I basically wanted, and you can see that kudzu is appearing out of there, another unwanted immigrant in the South, and this doesn't resemble anything like the plans behind it. Sometimes people read it as a ganglia, which I find wonderful. They're not. It's just branches of some tree that had these big fruits on it that I sort of stretched in the Photoshop, and the flame that you see is it's from the Turkish manuscript, and it's when Muhammad is ascended to heaven on his famous horse that had, the face of the person. He appears not with a halo like in Christian iconography, but as in a burning flame to signify his ascension to the heaven, to signify that he is the most important of the prophets. You will see this. I'm just going to point out some, elements in my work. In most of these pieces, you're going to see the image of this black hole. It all came from one single image that I pilfered from the internet and then played with, and. These power poles, that I'm using is, people often tell me that it's such an odd angle, and I kind of thought myself about why I chose to do that. Sometimes things sort of need to reveal themselves to you in a, after you have done them. I really have very little interest of having an idea, executing it, and calling it done. That totally bores me. If there isn't something that's going to surprise me in the process of making, if I don't look at the piece and say, where did this come from? I think I have failed. Something that they say to the writers is, in the writing workshop, is no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. So in other words, if you have this grand idea and just kind of go down and write it from the beginning to the end, you can throw it in the trash right away. If there isn't going to, if your own work is not going to take you somewhere where you didn't think you're going to end up, it probably is not going to be all that interesting to the reader. It's not going to take reader anywhere. Time and space. And this is the last piece in the series. Again, this is after my father passed away, so it's called Nocturne for my father. Okay, 45, good. Then we'll wrap this up very soon. I like to use things that are going to have, go back, why are you jumping around? I like to use things that are going to be referred to kind of very concrete things, but also could mean something else. Like, for example, that white cloth, kind of flying in the space. It's kind of my homage to the grand historic paintings of grand battles or something like that, where very often you are going to, like Albert Altdorfer's, the German painter's work, where there will be kind of this, like a banner in the sky that would be flowing, and usually there would be an important, message on it. I left, my blank, but it also, I'm very much referring to, my father had multiple cancers when he died, and he had these sores on his head that wouldn't heal, and his head need to be wrapped with these, white bandages, and he hated them, and he was embarrassed by them. He didn't want to go out, with them. Doctors are not very good patients, and they can't take being sick themselves, very well. And for me, this was kind of my way of kind of releasing him from his pain, releasing him from his cancer, releasing him into the universe. The little piece in the small square is actually image of the process of apoptosis, the cell death. So, so you can see where I'm going. There are a lot of elements that can be read one way or another way, and you don't necessarily need to know the story of about my father. I am also, as an artist, I'm also interested in hearing what do people see and how do they process it. I see these pieces as kind of very unconventional maps or landscapes. And one of the things that really interests me is creating an image in which there will be no single protagonist, where things are going to be kind of coming in and out of the view, if you will, and in and out of your attention, and hopefully giving you something to think about. Okay, so after I finished The Migrant Universe, I went through this truly terrifying period, truly terrifying to every artist, and that which is basically you can't always be outputting things, in the same way. So I had this. I was on sabbatical, and I had this residency in Ireland, and for one thing, I didn't want to be shipping things back and forth, so everything, my clothes and my equipment all had to fit in one suitcase. So I brought a bunch of these small Asian papers, they're 7 by 7 inches, and I brought a bunch of my prints that didn't make it, proofs that were not used later on, and decided to deal with this sort of a vacuum, that finishing of this big work, that took me 5 years to complete, to kind of deal with that by trying to tell myself to not overthink, things, to sort of spontaneously play with the form and so on and just see what emerges. So these are from these pieces that you're seeing, like this piece of kidney or this, they're all from my prints, from the proofs that for whatever reason, are not exhibitable, something went wrong and so on. I'm going to skip through these. Actually, I'm not going to skip it. These are, again, I'm very much inspired by, among other things, current events. I think about current events. I think about politics. I think about where are we going as a society in my work. So this was during the time of, this is something that I decided to do when the amount of surveillance that Obama administration was doing, was being revealed in the papers. And this one is titled The Future of Secrets. Inevitably, they get spilled, right? This one is titled Gathered from Available Data. So I was literally taking the words, the lines, the headlines from New York Times and kind of interpreting them in my own ways. I'm very happy with these satellites. Of course, I've pilfered sort of images of them from the internet, and then I doctored them, so to speak. It's hard to find a good-looking satellite. They're basically like buckets with solar panels, So, but this one was, I applied this Chiyogami paper, which is a decorative, Japanese paper on them, and I thought that really improved them. In 1913, summer of 1913, I went back to Sarajevo. As you can imagine, cultural institutions and life in Sarajevo have greatly suffered, and Bosnia is the second poorest country in Europe now, and the country is divided administratively into the Serb Republic and federations of Croatia. Anyway, long story, but basically the governing structures are Kafka-like, to say the least. And what I'm photographing here, this is the interior of the National Museum. It's sort of like equivalent of it's like our National Gallery or your Museum of Natural History in Washington or in New York and so on. So you can see that the exhibits are gone. They have been hidden from bombing and so during the war. But this museum at the time I was photographing, it was closed, as were a number of other museums, or they were in such a bad shape that they couldn't, they couldn't be open to the public. So I went to talk to the curators who still work there, even though they were not paid in the months. This is from the book that I have been working on that involves both of my poetry and the photography, from these museums. This is where, remember that National Library, the little bit that was saved from it, this is where it's now. It's basically in the former garages of these army barracks. Sarajevo is full of steel and glass. There's zillions of malls. You can buy the most glamorous stuff, in the world. There's zillions of these film festivals, and it's a lot easier to sort of take token photographs with Angelina Jolie or something during some film festival than to kind of figure out sustaining plan to preserve country's culture. This is from former Museum of Revolution, now Museum of History in Sarajevo. It's this modern mid-century gem of the building that is in a total disrepair. I think that they're getting around to restoring it through the funding from abroad. This is the images of the guns from the World War II that are preserved there. And one of the things that I went to the Museum of Literature and Performing Arts, where my mother was a curator, where I practically grew up. So this is the kind of traditional Balkan courtyard floor with these river rocks, and on this side is the manuscript by the only winner of the Nobel Prize, Ivo Andrić, novelist Ivo Andrić. And when I went into the archives, people were very kind to sort of let me go everywhere. They actually put in my hands this manuscript. This is like our, think about the most important iconic, Fitzgerald, something. So anyway, I'm holding this manuscript and I'm realizing it's damp. It's held in damp storage. There isn't anything else. So that was my little foray into photojournalism. If you look up Catalog of Silence, if you're interested in this museum thing, there's a photo essay of mine online about it. And then, as a byproduct of that, I was taking a lot of photographs, around Sarajevo, and this is something that I'm kind of very interested in working with now. I always found that kind of a tension between photographic image and hand-done, painted or drawn image is very productive. And so this is Sarajevo Story 1. This is Sarajevo Story 2. These are these are smaller. It's about 36 or 40 inches across. And then, this is kind of like a daily practice for me. I work quite a bit with my scraps. That was kind of sabbatical idea when I was sort of on a budget and I was trying to purchase as little as possible in terms of paper and other art materials. But I tend to regurgitate the, you can see that these black things are kind of parts of that image of the chrysanthemum. Chiogami paper, of course. This is the plant that I call Mad Prophet. I mean, not the plant, but my photograph of the plant that I call the Mad Prophet. One of the reasons you see all these images of plants, not just about the hybridity of them, but plants are awesome. Plants have their own choreography, and every once in a while you kind of catch the picture of it, and it's just eloquent. And the most recent thing that I'm going to show you here, I've put this in the wrong order. This is the series that I finished kind of a few years ago, on the eve of my 50th birthday. I've been doing these one at a time, and they kind of were they wanted to be together. They were telling me we want to be together. And as my 50th birthday was approaching, I was kind of coming close to the 49 of them. And 49 is a beautiful, elegant number, right? 7 by 7, and so on. So they, and I've decided they are a piece there. I'm going to make this collection of these kind of haiku notes. It's called 49 Ways of Being There. And so I'm just going to share some of the current images from my studio. This is how I think. This is my notes. It's a mess. I have lots and lots of drawers and boxes of leftovers of things, of images I picked up from magazines, of images I've picked up, pieces of, like, for example, these sort of white things with holes in the middle. That's a piece that, for one reason or another, didn't make it. And actually, right now, I'm sort of trying to see how can Tanja work with sort of more singular thing, right? One object on the image, but really, if you look at it, it's not singular at all. I'm interested in tangles. I'm not interested in smoothness. I'm interested in things I will always go for a weedy thicket rather than mowed lawn, if you will. And for the printmakers, just showing you, things always seem so neat and clean in a gallery, but art is hard work, don't let anybody tell you anything else. So here I am doing the process that's called spit bite, and on the copper plate. It's a form of aquatint printmakers. And I work by kind of dribbling the pretty strong solution of the nitric acid, and that also creates these runny marks. And right now I'm working on the new series of largish, prints. Here I am inking one of them. Here are some first proofs. They're still black and white and so on. And here I am pulling that "What Was I Thinking" print. My first color proof is always "What Was I Thinking" proof. It's inevitably something I'm totally dissatisfied with, but at least it gives me an idea where I want to go. And again, I'm concluding with any work is hard, any work is mess, and really there is no purpose to life without it. So you're better off having a messy life. You're better off having a complicated life than taking somebody else's mold and form and kind of inhabiting it for the sake of making life smooth. Because whether you fight it or not, life is going to be complicated, and it's really important to find beauty in that mess. All right? So I leave you with that thought. Sorry. Two questions. Yes?
Just seeing some of your artwork, you seem very inspired by patterns that I could almost, forgive me, I don't want to insult you, but I could open up like a high school science textbook and see
You're giving me compliments.
black holes and cells and things like
Yep.
I was just wondering if you could talk more about ways that like science, like modern science, has influenced your work.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That's a great question, and you are not insulting me at all. I'm grateful for your high school textbooks and old high school textbooks are great. You know, science gives us so many great images. Science gives us so many metaphors, if you think about it. Science really, scientific imaging, and not just, I know you're asking me about contemporary science, but one of the things that I'm really interested in, as a printmaker, many printmakers are, because printmaking techniques of etching, lithography, and so on were used for scientific illustration, right? And still are in some ways. How did this way of looking into this body and drawing these clear images of things, you know, how did it evolve? You know, if you look through the history of scientific illustration, you're really learning a great deal about our cultural, social, religious, sometimes, attitudes toward the human body. And that is also something, that story I didn't get to talk about it, but thank you for asking, is something that I'm really interested in. If you think about what drawing is, you know, if you're a printmaker and an artist that works on paper and drawing a lot, you can't help but you think about, okay, what kind of language is this? You know, how does it compare to language, this thing that's coming out of my mouth? You know, how do you get something that would be really, if you took a kidney out of the human body and observe it, it would be a clump of bloody mess, right? But in that drawing that was 18th century drawing, you know, it's this clean, rational, you know, thing, if you will. So how do we have to kind of lie about what things are in order to understand what things really are? And like I told you, my father was a physician and a cancer researcher, and my first idea of beautiful landscapes was looking through his microscope. When we abandon these notions, what's terrible, what's gross, what's important, what's not important, we can sort of see that there's a great deal of wonderful metaphors, wonderful points of departure for thinking, if you will, you know, in the images that are not meant to be beautiful, you know. Therefore, people tell me, why did you put the kidney in that? That was such a nice print otherwise. So I'm interested, you know, in beauty of things that might be conceived as gross or scary and so on, because I guess it's my way of telling myself to pay attention to the world, even though I'm sometimes scared to look at it in the face. I'm very scared now. But, you know, I still feel I do need to read the paper, you know. If that answered that at all.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming.